Many of us are familiar with the story of the Exodus, where God's people are entrapped in slavery under the nation of Egypt. God redeems them through the 10 plagues and then the parting of the Red Sea, and finally the people are free. 45 days later, the people begin to murmur and complain, asking God, why did you bring us out here into the wilderness simply to have us die? How much better were we in slavery when we were able to eat all the food that we wanted and drink as much as we desired? And so God gave them manna to eat. He gave them water to drink out of the rock. And as they continued to complain, God continued to provide for them. We read of these stories in Exodus chapters 15 through 17. And finally they approach Mount Sinai. And the people say, yes, we are willing to be God's chosen people, a holy nation, set apart for God's use, to be a royal priesthood as an example for the world around us. So Moses goes up the mountain, receives the 10 commandments, and begins to receive the law. And as Moses comes down the mountain in Exodus chapter 31, he finds himself viewing the people having a party with a golden calf that they are worshiping. And how easy it is for us as a modern audience to read the story and go, what were the people thinking? What was wrong with them? They literally saw God use a single finger to press down the 10 plagues upon Egypt. A single finger. They literally watched the hand of God part the entire Red Sea in half so that they could walk through on dry ground. And yet they built this golden statue, and yet they worshipped this idol that they crafted with their own hands instead of the God that they were receiving instructions from that dwelled at the top of the mountain. What was wrong with these people? Even further, when we read that the people of Israel are finally leaving Mount Sinai in Leviticus chapter 11, we find other problems. The people are complaining about food and water again. Finally it came to the place that the people were complaining that all they had to eat was this manna, this very gift that they thanked God for, back in Exodus 15 and 16. And so God had sent, a quail storm, enough quail for the people to eat until they grew sick and tired of eating this quail. But I wonder, for how easy it is to look at this people, as I continue to reread through the stories, I could not really find a positive quality, a positive trait about this generation of Israel. Personally, as I continued to read and reread through the story, I struggled to see anything positive about this generation, except for maybe Moses himself, who was leading it, and Moses who was crying out to God, please, why did you give me this responsibility? But there wasn't really anything special about this people, except perhaps a special ability to displease God and to disobey over and over and over again. And yet, that's not what God thought of these people. In the book of Jeremiah, many years later, God says this to Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. Go and proclaim in the ears of Jerusalem, saying, thus says the Lord, I remember concerning you the devotion of your youth, the love of your betrothals, your following after me in the wilderness, through a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord. The first of his harvest, all who ate of it became guilty. Evil came upon them, declares the Lord. Now, may I ask you a question? What? God thought that this people was holy? God thought that this people was special? He loved these people? The devotion to their betrothals? He considered them as holy. What is going on? Reading through the story throughout Exodus 15 through 20, and then reading what Moses had found them doing as he came down the mountain, reading what this generation had continued to do, continue to live in the same way in Leviticus 11 through 16. And yet God considered this people as holy? How could this be? I wonder if it was because in the midst of all the complaining, in the midst of the grumbling and arguing and the pushing back and the disobedience, this generation of Israel continued to follow the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. In the midst of their grumbling and complaining, in the midst of their pushing back, they continued to follow the presence of God. Whoa! How difficult do I find it for myself to continue to follow the presence of God? How difficult it is to find myself to continue following the presence of God. Is there really anything stopping me from trying to go off my own way, for trying to fulfill my own desires, instead of continuing to pursue those things that God desires? This generation of Israel, if they chose to depart from the rest of the nation, if they chose to pursue their own path and leave the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, they would not have had food for the next day. They would not have been provided for to drink water from the rock, because they would have been apart from the people. For them to separate themselves from God's presence meant an immediate death. I wonder what I could learn from this generation of Israel, that it's so easy to look down upon, so easily to question, how could they mess up this often? Is it a testament for just how faithful our God is? Absolutely it is. However, this people remained faithful to follow the presence of God. And that is something that I continue to struggle with.